Welcome to the Six Hockey.
Garrett scores! Welcome back to the Six Hockey Podcast. Matthew and Jared join you for today's video. And Jared, we're doing another redraft video, but we are doing a specific year and a specific league, OHL. Obviously, if you've been watching the channel, you've seen the other crew have been doing the OHL redraft videos, and we'll follow suit with one they left out, which is, of course, the 2008 OHL Draft. We have 8 players that are formerly GTHL alum. Still are GTHL alum, and we will pick from them, and we'll come out a ranking where we think they should have been drafted. We'll tell you where they were actually drafted, and then we'll have a nice list. And so it will be a fun little video. We'll give some information behind the players and our reasoning for why they are being taken in that draft position, or why we feel they should be taken there. But before we begin, Jared, we will have to figure out who gets the first overall selection.
That's the $1 million question.
That is $1 million question. I think we go a little old classic.
Yeah, good old-fashioned rock, paper, scissors. Best of one.
Best of
one.
one.
Of one on
Best
shoot.
of one, no best of 3.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Always go rock. Okay. All right. I didn't ask him what he had for breakfast. That's why I lost. That's usually my go-to. But I'm not a sore loser. So, Jared, you have the first selection in the 2008 OHL Draft.
So I'm playing a fun little role. I'm playing the role right now of the Sudbury Wolves that had the first overall pick in the 2008 OHL Draft. And I'm going to be taking the guy that, in fact, was drafted 9th overall in the actual 2008 OHL Draft. This guy was drafted to the Plymouth Whalers, who, as of the 2015-16 season, relocated to the Flint Firebirds. If you know your OHL history, I'm of course talking about Tyler Seguin, Stanley Cup champion with the Boston Bruins. In his first year, of course, involved in that classic Phil Kessel trade, went over to the Dallas Stars, and now is still trying to get back to that Stanley Cup. Year after year, I've predicted Dallas to win the Stanley Cup, but that's a story for another day. He has won Stanley Cup. He's an alumni of the GTHL's Toronto Nationals. And in his U16 season, he had 39 goals, 47 assists for a total of 86 points in just the 51 games that he played. This guy is the real deal. And for sure, you'll see when he's next to the other names in the 2008 draft, it's just no question that he's the first overall pick off the board. Of course, he ended up being the second overall pick in the NHL draft in 2010. That was right behind Taylor Hall, if I'm not mistaken. He's just the real deal.
Yeah, guy who's been plagued by injuries as of late, obviously hasn't been able to return to that player he was back in his prime, but still, like you said, a big part for the Dallas Stars forward core. And, it doesn't matter about that rock, paper, scissors game because, it's if I won, I was also taking Tyler Seguin as well. But I will have the honor of picking second overall as the Owen Sound Attack, who had the second overall selection, and I am taking a player originally drafted 7th overall by the Ottawa 67s in that draft, and I'm talking about, of course, a former Montreal Canadian.
Former member of multiple teams. Let's get that out there.
That's true, multiple teams. Tyler Toffoli. Yes, Tyler Toffoli.
Draft Tylers.
Yes, it is a draft of Tylers. Stanley Cup champion in 2014 with the LA Kings. Of course, that was his rookie year in the NHL, so, start off with a high. One of the most traded active players in the league. He has played on 7 teams. We mentioned it: Montreal, LA, Vancouver, Calgary, New Jersey, Winnipeg, and now the San Jose Sharks. 868 games played in the NHL, almost 300 goals. Just a world-class sniper in the league. Still is. Of course, he played on that 70s line with Tanner Pearson, Jeff Carter during the Cup run. Scored a hat trick in the 2014 Cup Final Series. And so I feel there's no better player than to go with Mr. Tyler Toffoli to go second overall. Just under Seguin, but above the rest. Tyler Toffoli for me.
What if I told you I actually disagree with that pick?
Oh,
so at third overall, I'm going to be getting the player that I personally would have been going with no matter what at second overall. I actually like this player better. I'm, of course, playing the role of the Kingston Frontenacs right now. And I'm talking about Jeff Skinner, who's currently a member of the Edmonton Oilers. He's played more games than Tyler Toffoli, But in those more games, he also has more points. Jeff Skinner has 1,057 games played so far in his NHL career. And in those games, he has almost 700 points, just a hair under 700 points, 691 total points, 368 of those being goals, 323 of those being assists. He has 0 Stanley Cups, so that is something that Tyler Toffoli hasn't beaten in. But in terms of just individual scoring, but as well as individual, awards in his trophy case, he was the Calder Trophy winner in 2011. He's the real deal, one of the fastest skaters in the league. And that happens to be because he was a figure skater growing up, and his skating is just impeccable. It shows his days in figure skating clearly translated into the NHL because his skating is just smooth as butter. Yep. It's really crisp. Also, that's 2 members I've drafted so far that were members of the Toronto Nationals. In his GTHL U16 season, he had 44 goals, 24 assists for a total of 68 points in the 63 games that he played. And he's just absolutely incredible. He hasn't really had that much playoff experience. Actually, 2024 was the first time in his career that he had a little taste of playoff experience, so that's a little sad. But in general, he's just the real deal, an absolute machine. He was originally drafted 20th overall by the Kitchener Rangers, so it shows that I'm really high on this guy and bumping him all the way up to 3rd overall. And I personally would have gone with him at 2nd overall as well.
I mean, parents, listen up. Get your kids into figure skating. Get your kids into figure skating.
I agree.
And they might have a better shot at the NHL. You mentioned monster season in the GTHL U16 season. I forgot to mention Toffoli's monster season in the U16. 68 goals, 106 assists for 174 points in 83 games played. I think that's, for me, GTHL-based U16 season gives the edge for why I'm picking Toffoli over Jeff Skinner. But like you said, great NHL player. Tyler Toffoli as well, great NHL player, which leads to another great NHL player for my 4th selection, or my 2nd selection, 4th overall by the Plymouth Whalers. This guy was originally selected 138th in the draft by the Saginaw Spirit. I am going with the first defenseman off the board, Jamie Alexiak. Jamie Alexiak, not to be confused with Penny Alexiak, greatest Canadian athlete or Olympian, but Jamie Alexiak, 6'7", 250 pounds, just makes him an absolute unit. One of the biggest players to ever play in NHL history. Dallas, Pittsburgh, back to Dallas, Seattle. Actually scored the first goal for the Kraken, Jared. The more you know, the first goal in franchise history, so good for him.
You learn something new
every day.
You
learn something.
I did not know that one.
Yeah, well, you got to do your research. 0 Stanley Cups in his GTHL season. Not much of an offensive guy, of course. As we know, he's more of a defensive guy. 1 goal, 10 assists, good for 11 points in 51 games for the Toronto Nationals. He was drafted 14th overall in 2011, but of course, took some time to really establish himself as a full-time NHLer. And like I said, Saginaw Spirit, original draft pick, 138th. Jamie Alexiak jumps all the way to 4th overall. He's just been that solid of an NHL player for me.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good pick. Of course, a defensive defenseman, very, very strong player. Played on the Dallas Stars, he kind of bounced around a little bit. Dallas Stars, went to Pittsburgh, went back to Dallas, and now he's a member of the Seattle Kraken. He's a great pick. I think that's a totally fair pick at 4th overall.
But let me guess, you would have went with someone different.
No, I think that one would have been fair at 4th overall. But you will see, we're already zooming through this draft. We're already at 5th overall. And the list definitely, it takes a backseat a little bit. It's not as strong as those first 4 picks, but still a guy that had a fairly successful NHL career. It's Devontae Smith-Pelly, of course, most known for that 2018 run with the Washington Capitals, where he was kind of a surprise guy, and he ended up being very successful and very integral to that team that ultimately ended up winning it all. I'm playing the role right now of the Peterborough Petes, and I'm taking the guy that originally went 8th overall to the Mississauga St. Michael's Majors, who eventually became the Mississauga Steelheads in the 2012-2013 season, and now are the Brampton Steelheads as of the 24-25 season. But I'm taking this guy 3 picks earlier than he ultimately ended up going to those Mississauga St. Mike's Majors. In the NHL, he had just over 100 points in his career. He played 395 games played, had 101 total points, played on the Anaheim Ducks, the Montreal Canadiens, the New Jersey Devils, and most notably of all, it was those Washington Capitals where he won the Stanley Cup. And he was super clutch in that performance. In the GTHL, he was a Toronto Junior Canadian, played alongside his boy Tyler Toffoli, and he's just had a really, really good career. He obviously is done his main NHL playing days, but he has had a career, not necessarily a star in this league, but one of your role players that really ended up being pivotal for a team that won their first and only Stanley Cup in their history. And one thing you do have to mention with Devontae Smith-Pelly is that, especially during the COVID season, during the 2020 season, he was one of the most outspoken athletes in terms of racial diversity in hockey. So a very big ally, of course, being a member of the African-American community. And it's a privilege as the Peterborough Petes to draft this guy at 5th overall.
Dude, I love any player that donned the bleu, blanc, rouge. So I'm a huge fan of Devontae Smith-Pelly. One word to define his career, I'd say, clutch.
Yep.
Clutch.
That's what he's most known for.
I mean, playoff clutch performer, regular season, kind of just, whatever. Then come playoffs, this guy turns it up a notch, which you need players like that. And like you said,
he third and fourth line players that just step up under the spotlight.
And he delivered for Washington big time, scored some big goals on their quest for the Stanley Cup. Love that pick. Love Smith-Pelly as a Hab as well.
Three of those goals came in the finals, by the way.
Yes.
3 of the 7 came in the finals.
Yes, Lars Eller, too, former Hab, was big for the Washington Capitals. But he's not on the list, so we don't talk about Lars Eller.
I was going to add, Lars Eller scored that Stanley Cup winning goal for the Caps.
Yes,
This might as well be a Caps podcast.
Yes.
But let's move on to the 6th overall pick.
All right, 6th overall pick. Like you said, the player notoriety is going down. The stardom's going down. So much so, I'm actually going to take a goaltender. Some people who are diehard OHL fans who've been following the drafts for years might know exactly what I'm talking about. But I'm going to take, as the GM of the Barrie Colts, 6th overall, I'm taking this guy who originally went 130th overall by the Plymouth Whalers. Big bump up. I'm, of course, talking about Scott Wedgwood. Backup goaltender in the NHL. That's what most people know him from. Of course, he's played for teams like New Jersey, Arizona, Dallas, Nashville. 145 games played as a goaltender. Of course, didn't ascend to that starter role. Has been a reliable backup goaltender as of late in the NHL. 0 Stanley Cups in his minor hockey GTHL U16 season. For the Toronto Junior Canadians, a .291 goals against average and a .912 save percentage in 35 games. So quite a good season for Scott Wedgwood back when he was circa 16. Drafted 84th overall in 2010 by New Jersey. And of course, like I said, took about a decade to kind of secure that permanent backup role in the NHL. And of course, if you know Scott Wedgwood well, if you've been a fan of the teams he's played for, he's had some fun custom goalie masks featuring comic book themed, comic book characters. So, Mario Ninja Turtles.
I think the Wolverine mask might be the most notable one.
Yes.
That's my favorite one.
So I love the character. Love a guy who's a big comic nerd. I love comics, the Marvel, DC, love it all. So, big personality guy when it comes to goalie masks. And like you said, he actually helped Dallas in that 2023 playoff push. He was there for some clutch performances, and he had his first shutout NHL debut in 2016. Not many goaltenders get their shutout in their debut. He did it. Scott Wedgwood, 6th overall by the Barrie Colts for me. We love that pick over in Barrie.
And last year, at certain points in the season for the Dallas Stars, of course, a team that just fell short. They made it to the conference finals and ended up getting eliminated. But he was big in last year's regular season, just helping the Dallas Stars solidify a top seed in the NHL playoffs. And he's a guy that, obviously Jake Ottinger is the big starter there. He's the star goalie. But don't forget about that backup when Jake Ottinger ever falters, which, let's be real, doesn't happen very often. But when it does happen, Scott Wedgwood is one of the most suitable and reliable backup goaltenders in the league at this point. A very, very strong goalie. And personally, I'm not a Dallas Stars fan, but I am a guy that has been very high on that team for many years in a row, as I mentioned earlier with Tyler Seguin. And I'll spoil it right now. They are my pick to ultimately win the Stanley Cup in the 2025 NHL playoffs. And while, yes, Jake Ottinger is going to be the main guy they have to rely on, if Scott Wedgwood isn't good enough to stand tall in that net, if ever Jake Ottinger falters or, if in the case of an injury, they're not doing nothing. So Scott Wedgwood, as much as he, was an 130th overall pick in the OHL draft, he's found himself in a position where teams are relying on him pretty big time. And that's a team that might as well go mess around and win the Stanley Cup. He's one of the most important roles in the entire NHL at this point. But moving on with the 7th overall pick, and I'm going to be playing the role right now of the Ottawa 67s. This is a guy that, he isn't necessarily the most notable NHL player. He's bounced around some teams, played on Toronto a little bit, played on the Anaheim Ducks, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Edmonton Oilers, and now finds himself as a member of the New York Rangers. I'm, of course, talking about Sam Carrick. He hasn't necessarily had the most successful career so far. He's played just a hair under 300 games played. It's 298 games played in total. But he has some success. 33 goals, 35 total assists, for a total of 68 points in his career. In the GTHL, he was a member of the Toronto Red Wings. And I'm not sure if the camera picks this up. It's way up there, but we do actually have a jersey of the Toronto Red Wings hanging in our studio right now. And that's for our boy Sam Carrick. In his U16 season, he had 23 goals, 37 assists for a total of 60 points in just 54 games played. He ended up becoming the captain of the Toronto Marlies in the AHL before becoming a full-time NHL player. Not necessarily the most successful NHL player, but as we were mentioning with Devontae Smith-Pelly, sometimes in the NHL, you need those role players, you need those physical guys. And Sam Carrick is just that. He's a hard-nosed guy. He's a two-way center who's most known for his gritty style. He has a brother who also played pro hockey, that being Trevor Carrick. And he was originally drafted 15th overall by the Brampton Battalion that eventually became the North Bay Battalion. So he's jumped up, gotten a little bit of a bump there by 8 total picks, as he's going to be my 7th overall pick to those Ottawa 67s.
Sam Carrick. Love that. I love the in-depth view you had on Scott Wedgwood. Just have to say, Dallas loves Scott Wedgwood, but they need him to not perform well against him, considering Scott Wedgwood plays for the Avalanche, Jared, and not the Dallas.
My apologies there. My apologies.
We have to keep that in. We're keeping that in.
Okay, we're keeping that in. I was too focused on last year.
This is for our TikTok fans.
I had many TikToks going in depth on those.
This will make it back onto the TikTok page. Jared thinking Scott Wedgwood was a star. That's
my apologies there. My apologies. Well, in fairness, on our little notes here, we didn't have that little update with the Colorado Avalanche. And I made a boatload of TikToks on my own personal TikTok page. I won't plug that there, but if you search up my name, you'll find it. And I made a million TikToks all about why I believe the Dallas Stars were going to win the Stanley Cup in 2024.
So it's fresh. It's
fresh in the mind. In those TikToks, I talked about why, as much as Jake Ottinger was my ultimate prediction to win the Conn Smythe, I talked about how Scott Wedgwood was a guy that could keep them afloat if they ever falter. And guess I didn't check that he switched over.
Dallas is hoping he falters. Dallas is hoping he
they
falters
are hoping for
in
that.
case, especially if what's his name, Blackwood gets injured and they meet in a playoff round.
Exactly.
Woo, that could be a story. But last pick in this 2008 OHL redraft, I am going with Adam Glendening, not to be confused with Luke Glendening. They have no relationship whatsoever. They're not siblings,
not cousins to our knowledge.
Glendening, just a common name, I guess. Glendening. Adam Glendening, just 90 games in the NHL. That's why some people might be scratching their head. Who is this guy? Adam Glendening, he has played on Chicago, Edmonton, the Rangers, Coyotes, Columbus, Philadelphia. He's been around town. Just 24 points in his 90 career games. Played the 0 Stanley Cups, of course. Minor hockey on the Toronto Marlboros for his GTHL U16 season. Had 8 goals, 25 assists. Good for 33 points in 49 games. I am the Saginaw Spirit, 8th overall, taking Adam Glendening, who was originally drafted by the London Knights, 92nd overall, way back when in 2008. So, Glendening getting a bump. Obviously, we're only doing GTHL players, but we don't have to remind ourselves that. But Glendening making himself into the top 10 for this draft. And he's been a solid hockey player, 6 different NHL teams. Now he plays in the KHL. Just couldn't hold on to that role in the NHL. But, a guy who's still playing hockey, still playing pro hockey, so he deserves a spot on this list with the others. So, he was a gross young hockey player back in the day.
Yeah, he had a little career for himself.
He did, and he's still going strong in the KHL back in Russia. So, professional. That's what matters. The pros associated next to his name. So good for Adam Glendening. Of course, not to the same tiers as the likes of Seguin, Toffoli, Skinner, Alexiak, whatever. But he's made a name for himself, which is what's important. So there you have it. take a look at our top 8 selections in the 2000 OHL redraft. Tyler Seguin, Toffoli, Skinner, whatever. Sudbury Wolves had the first overall pick back then, and so Seguin would be going to Sudbury instead of Plymouth. So very interesting to do some of these redrafts, and it's a fun video, fun to talk about, to ask the question, what if? And now we see where these players would have gone. And, you know, if you agree, tell us you agree. If you don't agree, tell us where you would have had other guys. And you can make your own draft list. Leave it in the comments. We'll be interested to see how your list pan out versus our. But that being said, Matthew, Jared, thanks for tuning in to the 6 Hockey Podcast. And we will see you in the next video.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to be pumping out a whole bunch of videos just like this. Some quizzes, all kinds of fun activities. We're going to be pumping out content all semester long, so you do not want to miss this. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching.
Take care.